Lemont Curry. Look before you leap. Lemont Curry.
Raise your hand if you think my speech title, Look Before You Leap, sounds boring. That's understandable because intuitively we all know to look both ways before we cross the street and think before we say something stupid. That's because we all have common sense. Or do we? Madam Contest Master, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. I will be the first to admit that I've made some reckless decisions when I threw caution to the wind. I had to learn the hard way that there are consequences to my failure to look before I leaped. For example, when I was 35 years old, I married a beautiful, curvaceous young lady named Sheila, whom I barely knew. Now, our marriage was based solely on the prophecy we had received from her charismatic spiritual leader. Well, maybe her curves had a little bit to do with it, but the point is, I was fascinated by his prophecy that our union would create a child who would grow up to be a world-renowned prophet. Now, during our short engagement, Sheila made several prudish remarks, from which I concluded that premarital sex, it wasn't going to happen. But you could have knocked me over with a feather when she told me on our wedding night that sexual intimacy was not part of her vows. Now, that was a non-starter for me. And I helped but wonder, did she think she would get pregnant by an immaculate conception? The consequences of our failure to look before we leap resulted in our marriage being DOA, dead on arrival. Now, as time moved on, my brother decided to play Cupid and introduced me to Elaine. He thought she would be a good match for me. But there was one little problem. Elaine lived in Switzerland. Now, for me, a long-distance relationship is the girl who lives 2 or 3 blocks over. I had no interest in someone who lived 3,000 miles away. But to save face with my brother, I agreed to a meeting. And to my surprise, the chat conversation was quite pleasant. In fact, it led to other conversations afterwards. 2 months later, Elaine told me that she would travel to the U.S. for a conference in Florida. I suggested that we meet in Atlanta after her conference. A few days later, she faxed over her itinerary, and my eagle-eyed secretary noticed that she would change planes in Atlanta at the exact same time I was changing planes in Atlanta. So on a whim, I decided that I would surprise her at the airport a week ahead of our scheduled meeting. But there was one small problem. I didn't know how to recognize her. I had never seen a picture of her. I contacted her housekeeper, who told me she's easy to recognize. She's traveling with 2 other women, one's from Germany and one's from Ghana, and they all talk very loud. So on her arrival date, I'm at the airport. I'm waiting for her to clear customs. And during this time, I noticed how immense this airport is. This place is so big, you could put a baseball field in the middle of it. Eventually, I heard a cackling laughter. And when I see it coming from 3 women, I said, bingo, I found them. Now, they were quite some distance from me, but there was a tall, athletic young man close by. I pointed them out and asked him if he would take this gift and give it to Elaine. He looks down there and says, "You mean those 3 women way down there?" I said, "Brother, get the stopping before they get away." So he takes off like a track star. But before he reaches them, they've stepped on the escalator. Now, if you've been to the Atlanta airport, you know that escalator seems like it goes up 4 or 5 stories to the next level. So they hear the commotion he's creating as he races up the steps, but they were shocked when he calls Elaine by name and gives her my gift. Then he immediately runs down the up escalator. Well, she calls me immediately. She doesn't know I'm in the airport. She says, "How did you do that? How did you find me in this huge facility?" And I told her, I have friends in high places. They see everything. Now, I had wanted to carry the suspense on a little longer, but my plane had started to board. So I had to hastily introduce myself before dashing off to catch my flight. Now, a week later, we did meet in Atlanta, and we had a wonderful time. We talked about our likes and dislikes and our idiosyncrasies. And as our relationship developed, I could see the advantages of looking before leaping. We even tossed around the idea of a respectable engagement period. I told her I really think it should be 5 to 6 years. But once we took into account my advanced age, my decline in health, and my loss of bodily function, we decided to cut that down to 6 months. Well, Elaine and I have now been married 20 years, and I can honestly testify to the rewards of looking before you leap. Mr. Contest Master.
Stop it.
That's 7 minutes, 19 seconds.
Good job.
Oh, dang, if somebody laughs, I'll take it over.
Okay.